Okay, welcome today. Our webinar today is on stock receipting and how to keep track of your incoming stock. Okay. Today's webinar will be covering stock receipting. So we're talking about configurations and how that works behind the scenes, user security levels, a brief overview of what we call the auto file and how this works in relation to stock receipting. We'll be looking at what we call the price change screen, which will explain what it is, what it does, who can see this, and how it works. Also the differences in stock receipting. There's two main delivery docket, two main areas in which you can look at stock receipting. We've got delivery docket versus stock receipt method, and I'll be explaining the differences between them. We'll also look at how to reconcile delivery dockets and even multiple delivery dockets to one tax invoice. We'll be looking then at a brief overview on how to report on and view stock receipts that have been done in the past. First, we're going to be starting with configurations. So for configurations, there's several different areas. There's many questions in which you'd ask yourself, different questions in terms of how you want to maintain this area. One of the questions might be, what will the default settings in the price change screen be? Now this is based on whether you use markup or margin, and really it defaults to what you use on a general basis. Now this can be overwritten each time you use the screen, but it's just a matter of what you set the default as being. And you might ask yourself also, are there any rounding or things that might apply to that? We do have configurations for that as well. Then you'd ask yourself, which user group can stock receipt items? This is based on a particular user group in the system that you can set, and anyone in that user group does have authority to change prices. Anyone that's not will not. You can also decide whether you want to have labels to automatically process to the label system each time you process a stock receipt. But the most basic configurations, which we'll double check right now, is what we call auto purchase journal. Now if we have a look in your creditor configuration, these are configurations that you can come in here and change when you need to. I wouldn't recommend changing on a frequent basis. It's something to set and forget, so to speak. As we can see here, this configuration, auto purchase journal from stock receipt, that's selected. What that means is each time you process a stock receipt, or even if you reconcile a delivery docket, it will automatically create the purchase journal behind the scenes for you instead of you going in and doing it yourself manually. The other configuration in here that you might want to look at is do not force print adjustment notes. That really refers to come the end of the month, when you're rolling your creditors, will it force you to have all your adjustment notes printed or not? We'd recommend leaving this unticked because that will force you to have everything printed. Okay. There is another configuration, and it's an ACR only config. It's to do with your stock liability. So if you didn't want the liabilities to be created when you did this sort of thing, you can get us to turn that off. However, we'd recommend leaving it on. So if you have any questions in relation to configurations, by all means contact us. We're here to help anytime you need. So, for user security, as I mentioned, security can be set in ACR, which will allow a certain user group, which is decided by the company, to allow users in that user group to be able to make price and cost changes when processing stock receipts. Anyone not set in the user group selected who processes stock receipts will load the price changes, if there are any, into what we call the auto file. Once loaded into the auto file, someone with authority to change prices will then need to log in to process these changes. However, we won't be covering auto file in today's webinar. This area of the system will be covered at a later date. So the first method that we'll be looking at today is the delivery docket method. Now that's really when suppliers send goods on what they call a delivery docket, which isn't a tax invoice, it's just a docket saying this is the goods that we've sent you. Okay, this will process, delivery dockets I should say, should process and update the stock levels only. This means that the financial side, the liability, will still be outstanding. As a result, this means that delivery dockets will still need to be reconciled once the tax invoice from the supplier arrives. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a quick way of processing a delivery docket. That's ordering. Stock receipts. Okay. So there's two different ways in which to look at both of these methods. You've got the manual method versus by the order method. Now, by the order method means that if you've previously got an order in the system for these goods, you can then retrieve that order information and it will help you out with processing these. Today's one we're going to be basing on your manual ones, manual methods. So to do a manual delivery docket, you simply open up the manual delivery docket screen. Now, as you can see, as by the screen, you can tell what kind of information the system is going to need. So the first thing is the creditor number. We enter the creditor in, and it will come up and it will preload the name and the suburb of that creditor. The next thing we do is we enter in docket numbers. Okay. And then we enter in products. Should have some test products in there. Okay. And as you can see, if you try to enter in a product that isn't linked to that supplier on the product file, it will bring up a message like that. It doesn't matter, it's just a warning. You can click OK and it will still let you enter that product in. Okay, we've received 10 of those. And it fills in the extended cost from the product file, from what you've got in the product file. All you need to do then is complete it. Once that finishes, that will then update that particular product and product file with, and it will increase by the received amount, obviously. The other way to process goods is by what we call a stock receipt. Now, this handles both the stock levels and reconciling the liability in the system. If that configuration we looked at earlier, the auto purchase journal configuration, is set, the system can automatically create the purchase journal for each stock receipt and as a result automatically reconcile. If not, they act much like a delivery docket. For instance, if it's not set, if the auto purchase journal is not set, it won't create the purchase journal behind the scenes and you will still need to manually do so. We would recommend, of course, having auto purchase journal turned on. However, it is entirely up to the site to decide. So what we'll do now is we'll enter in a quick stock receipt. Okay. At this point, we can leave that blank if we're not sure and go straight down here. So if we enter in test products again, let's put the same product in we did before. And again. Okay, so it's pre-filling the line cost from the product file. That is what each unit is set as being the cost on the product file. So if we want to change it, we can. However, we'll tab over and put it in. So as you can see down here, the estimations of what the costs would be on the stock receipt are looked at by the system, so it estimates what it would be. So for the sake of getting the stock receipt correctly and in terms of balancing it, I'll just put that information in there. 66 was supposed to be. As you can see, your proof is 0 and it will let you stock receipt that item. So once you hit complete, it will update the product file with that amount of product that you've received, which was 10, and it will also do the purchase journal behind the scenes. What I'll do now is I'll actually show you the price change screen. So again, we're looking at a stock receipt. So we'll put in another stock receipt in here. We'll click down here. We might put in a different product. Okay. So at this point, the invoice that we would have received from the supplier has a different line cost for this product. So we then enter in that cost that they've entered on the actual stock receipt. So we put in the cost and tab over. As we can see, this is the stock receipt price change screen. It pre-fills with the product ID, the description, and the old and new costs. As we can see down here, we've got old prices versus new prices. This is the section where the configuration I was referring to earlier comes into play. As you can see, maintain prices and maintain margin. So depending on what you as a company by default use, whether it's markup or margin, will default what comes up in here. However, you can override that. Also, with this screen, you can make any changes in here that you need to. So whether you want to change the margin to 30%, it will change the prices accordingly. Also, if you wanted to change the price, let's say we wanted to change that to 40, it will change the margin accordingly. So whatever you're changing will reflect in the other one. You can update the product file at this point. For instance, if you wanted to put quantity breaks in, as an example, you can do that in here. And once you click accept prices, it will then save the product file according to what you've entered. The other button down the bottom here, leave cost, basically means if it's recognizing a cost change, but you don't want to change your product file with that, you can process a stock receipt at this point with an adjusted cost, however, not update your product file. Okay, that's pretty much all there is to it. And I'm going to accept those changes. And then once it goes back to this screen, it'll ask you how many you've received. Tab through, and it gives you the extended cost. Now, as you can see, we haven't got any invoice totals in there. It's not going to let you accept it without it. So I'll just put that information in. And proof is 0, so I am right to accept it. And we're done. The next element is goods returned. You might have received goods that, for an example, might be faulty and you need to send it back to the supplier. You can do that by using what we call the goods returned area. A similar looking screen. We start by putting in the supplier number, and again it will pre-fill that information. And it's looking for the original invoice number and date. The most important element here is the invoice number, which will link to the supplier number. That's what finds the link between them. Now I know that that's the invoice number we used in one of them, and that's the date. So now we put in the products that we're sending back. Which we know, it will pre-fill the information with the line cost, but not let you change it at this point, mainly because it's linking back to a prior accepted stock receipt. So let's send one back, and you can see it's going to put the extended cost in. All right, there's no need to actually fill in totals here because it's estimating the totals based on the cost and the quantity. Okay, once it's correct, click the complete button. Okay, it's going to ask you how you'd like to output it, and for the sake of showing you what it will look like, I'll output it to screen. We'll just accept the defaults there. That's any delivery instructions that you might have. Okay. And we process that. Okay. As you can see, it is quite large. So I'll just bring it down. You can see what a goods returned document looks like as a general rule. Delivery instructions will go in this section here. All the other information in relation to the supplier and the original invoice will go up here, and the supplier details, address details will go down here. So as we scroll down, we can see the product information, the total cost. You'll also note that we've got an office copy here because the system is defined to output an office copy. As we scroll down, we've got a supplier copy, which has exactly the same information. And I believe there was a third. No, okay. So we've got a supplier copy and an office copy. So you can keep the office copy, and you can also send that copy to the supplier. So we'll minimize that. Now, the next message that comes up is saying, do you want to raise a claim for this return? We would highly recommend clicking yes to that, because you need to put the financial side to it in there as well. You've got header information here. So we'll put some information in to show you. Return of goods. It's an inclusive figure. We're sending, well, even though we're sending one back, it won't let us put the information in because, as we can see, it's behind here anyway. So all we need to do at this point is click on OK. Okay, it's asking us if we want to print it. Now, normally we would click yes. If no was selected, that's where that configuration do not force print adjustment notes would come in. If it's unprinted, it will come the end of the month force you to then print those adjustment notes before you can roll your creditors month. What we'll do here is we'll click yes. Again, output it however you like. Now, if the supplier has a goods returned, for instance, email address specified on their record, if this little tick box is selected and OK is clicked, it will email off to that email address. However, we're not going to do that today. We'll open that to screen. And again, so we've got an example of what an adjustment note might look like. These templates are the templates that we use to send to you for creating your own templates. So this is why the area available is listed here. So we've got the details above here, reference number, date, the supplier number, etc. Supplier details and address details here. We've got the header, which appears at the top of the product list, and the goods listed underneath. Okay, so we'll minimize this. And we're done. So we've adjusted the goods, and we've also sent the adjustment note to the supplier for the claim. Another side to this area is the need to process manual purchase journals. You can do that. So as an example, If you had set the configurations off to automatically do the purchase journals, you would then need to process them yourself. What this will do is it'll take the liability in the system that you created via the delivery docket, as an example, and it will match to that and create the purchase journal for the financial side of things that your supplier has sent you, and it will match them up and marry them off. Firstly, to have a look at the liabilities that are in your system that have not yet been reconciled, we have what's called a stock liability report. So as we can see, I've done a quick search down the bottom for the name of that report, and it brings that up on screen. So we double click on that. Now this qualifier screen, you can qualify by supplier number range and or your supplier date range. So bear in mind, this is not the date that it was entered. This is the date that was on the tax invoice that they sent you. We've also got a processed tick box. So if we want to see anything for this particular supplier that has not yet been processed, we would qualify it by that supplier number. We would leave this unticked because we want to see unprocessed items, and then we click generate. What we'll do is we'll again open it up to screen, and it will show you that delivery docket that was originally entered, and this is the detail here. You see that 0 is in the process, that means it's unprocessed. If we had a report here that was showing the processed ones, it will show an X there. We can see the invoice total, invoice date, invoice number, all those details there, so you can print this report off to have next to you for when you're actually processing the purchase journals. It would make life a lot easier. What I'll quickly do is I'll show you another version of that report for processed items, and the only difference is that we're going to tick that tick box. So we'll generate that and again open it to screen, and as you can see, there are 3 items in there for that supplier that have been processed, and as you can see, there's an X next to them and the date on which they were entered. Actually, I should say the date that was entered into the purchase journal, and the purchase journal invoice number is there as well. And as you can see, they can differ. So this bottom one here, the invoice number on the delivery docket as an example was this, and the purchase journal invoice number is completely different. That can differ. So now we'll move on to how you actually process a manual purchase journal. So we need to look for purchase journal entry, which is that top section there. So we'll open purchase journal entry. So the first thing it asks for is the supplier number. Put that in and press tab. The second thing it asks for is the invoice number. Now again, this is linking to the liability that's in the system that hasn't been reconciled. So we put the exact invoice number in. Now if you're putting in an invoice number that does not match the liability in the system, it's not going to find it. So it's important that you get the invoice number correct. So the invoice date, put that date in. Don't worry, this is a test system. Tab over to the invoice total field. Now, I can't remember at this point what it was, so this is where I go back to the report, and it was 249.26, June 10. Yes, okay. 249. Oops, I've forgotten again. So let's shift back. 249.26. So that's what we enter into here, and we press tab. At this point, once we're in the GST general field, if we want the system to automatically calculate the GST element, we can press enter, and it will calculate the GST element that it estimates. However, we can override that if we decide to either way. So we'll press tab here, and it will take us down and default to the stock receipt clearing field. This is where the general ledgers are entered. Now, this can be changed. Comments can be added. Whatever you need to do here, you can split it between GL accounts should you need to do that. And that's just a matter of changing the amounts and adding more GL accounts in there. Now, the proof does need to be 0 in order to accept this. Once the proof at the bottom of the screen is 0, you know it's balanced, so it can then be accepted. But before we can accept it, we need to tab so that the second blank line appears and the proof is 0. Once done, we can accept the batch. It will confirm the batch total. As an example, you can add more than one thing to the one batch. Do you still wish to accept it? Click yes, and your purchase journal is processed. Now, if we were to run the stock liability again at this point, it will then not have that liability there because we've just processed that. So this will then appear on the processed ones. So the other side to purchase journals is processing adjustment notes manually. So the first thing we need to do is go back into purchase journal entry. We put the same information in. So we've got the supplier number, press tab. Invoice number. Okay, because they've used the same invoice number, it's bringing up a confirmation saying, I can recognize this number already in use. Is it okay to continue? So you can continue with using the same number. However, it is just an alert system to make you aware. Invoice date. That's only because of the, okay. So now that we're in the invoice total field, to open up the adjustment note screen, we press F5 here. As you can see, this brings up adjustment note entry. What you'll need to do is now enter the adjustment note details manually. So we can enter in something there. We can put up to 2 header detail fields in there. We'll just put adjustment note so we can refer back to it. And at this point, since we're manually putting the adjustment note in, we can actually choose from the GST list what applies. So we can put an inclusive, an exclusive, or an exempt GST figure. We'll put in the exclusive figure. And we can actually put in a different amount here according to the supplier details from that particular, let's say you might be looking at a delivery docket or something. It's just a matter of manually entering them. As we can see, we've got our net, GST, and our totals down the bottom. Now it does have a warning down here. Please be aware of this. If you create a document with a GST component, it is your responsibility to ensure that the GST is correctly accounted for. For any advice when it comes to accounting, by all means ask your accountant or your advisor in relation to that. Once all this information up here is correct, click on OK. It'll take you back to this screen. Again, you press enter on the GST to automatically calculate it. Tab to go to the GL account field, and let's put it in the same one that we had before, which was stock receipt clearing. And it's not going to let me. So let's choose another one. Again, you can tap enter in this field here for it to automatically calculate based on the previously entered figures. Now the notes that I'm putting in here will show on the general ledger account in question, so it will show on that purchaser's account. Again, tab down, our proof is 0. We've got a blank line here ready for the next one, so we know that this one is finalized, and we can accept the batch. Print it, yes. And scroll back, and we've got our adjustment note. And that's all there is to that. Now, in order to show you how to reconcile multiple delivery dockets, I'm actually going to go straight to the area in which you can do it without putting any in. So, dockets can be reconciled individually, or if you have 2 or more dockets and the supplier only sends you 1 tax invoice, you can reconcile all applicable delivery dockets to the 1 tax invoice. The easiest way to process this is to go into stock receipt maintenance. And that's that one there. So we find the appropriate dockets in whatever way suits. For instance, do the search to get all of the applicable delivery dockets up on screen here. And what we'll do is we're going to do a search for all applicable ones at this point. And the other thing to note about this screen is this only show ready to process. If we selected that, it will only show us delivery dockets that have not been processed. So I'm going to use this test database and scroll back to find 2. Right. So we have multiple suppliers in here, and as we can tell by each of these, they're delivery dockets. Now, one way of checking if you didn't have this ticked, whether it's been reconciled or not, is to click on the line. If the docket reconciliation button is grayed out like that, it's already been reconciled and you can't reconcile it again. It can only be done once. And as you can see with this one, it's then opened up and it hasn't been reconciled. The quickest way to filter them out is to tick that tick box. And as we can see, it's got all of those up there. So for this month, these ones have not yet been reconciled. So to reconcile them individually, all we need to do is click on the appropriate one, click on the docket reconciliation button, and it will then take you to the stock receipt screen where you can then enter in the tax invoice details received from the supplier. Make sure all your cost and quantities are correct and complete it that way. So if you're trying to reconcile more than one delivery docket to one tax invoice, we'll use these as an example. So let's say we wanted to reconcile both of those together. As an example, this might have been goods that have been manually reversed because it was entered by mistake perhaps, or credit might have been received. For whatever reason, it's been entered in as a negative balance. So once we've clicked those 2, and ensure that it's for the same supplier, because you cannot obviously reconcile delivery dockets. Actually, you might be able to. No, I don't think so. No. Okay, so it has to be the same supplier. Once you've ticked what you need to, we'll tick that one as well. We'll click on docket reconciliation, and it will bring up all the product details from those 3 delivery dockets in this one screen. And what we'll do now is we'll reconcile it to the tax invoice details. Obviously, we'll be making it up. So the tax invoice details received from the supplier. So we can just put in any details. As we can see down here, we've got a stock total based on what's been entered here, which includes this credit amount. So it's obviously going to increase, reduce the balance according to what's in there. So we put the details in, including the GST. So the total GST field is here. And we've got quite a considerable GST amount considering the total. And here is where you can then enter in any differences in pricing. Of course, again, if you're doing any kind of changes when it comes to costs, it will bring up the price change screen for each product that you're affecting at that point in time. Okay, so we'll accept that by completing it. And as you can see, because they're reconciled and this tick box is ticked, they've disappeared from this top one. It's a very handy way of going through month by month. Finally, we'll be looking at how to review stock receipts in other ways. So for instance, you might want to look at product maintenance. So if we look at product maintenance and we bring up the same search and look for the same product that we've been using, we've actually got a button here called stock receipts. Now this will actually show the last 6 stock receipts, so long as they fall within the last 6 months of the system. And that's a good way of actually showing you an overview for that product, how many times it's been stock receipted. Double clicking on a line will show you in display form the detail of that stock receipt. So that's one way of looking for them. Another is looking in stock receipt maintenance, which I've just shown you. You can look at all your processed and or unprocessed stock receipts, delivery dockets in there. That's the main maintenance screen for that. There's another area called stock movement inquiry. Now that can be brought up individually, or there is a way of actually going in via your product file of looking at that as well. If you look up your product summary, it gives you stats on that product. Now down the bottom we have a button called stock movement. That will load up your stock movement inquiry screen. And as you can see, these are the stock receipts here. You can do lots of different searches in here based on this product information. Finally, I'll show you something called the stock movement value report. Now, I'm just going to write down some details, because if we're going to look at the stock movement value report, we need to look as an example for things like the reference number. So I'm going to write down those reference numbers, and we're using product number 10085. Okay, so what we can do is cancel out of there and look at the stock movement value report, which is that top one. Let's load that up. So the first screen we come to is a choice between these two. If we're looking at the report, we select the top one by default and click on OK. So this is the qualifier screen that you see. The top one there is your transaction date. So you can either put one date in both of those fields or a date range. Now what we'll do is we'll look for the same date range that we've been entering. Now these here are the types of stock movements that you're looking for. So we know that we're looking for stock receipts, so we'll tick that. If, however, later on down the track we had a reference number that we weren't sure what it was, what we do is we'd actually tick all of those and put in the reference number in the transaction field here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to look at 1913 to 1916, which is the range of reference numbers that we looked at before. And let's click generate. Let's open that to screen. And of course nothing to print. So what we'll do is we're just going to put in the date range, just as an example of how you can filter information, and sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't, but it just depends on the information that you actually enter in. So to widen the search, so to speak, we're going to put in the same date, and we're going to say we're going to look for all stock receipts that were processed on that date. And let's open that up. Okay, so as we can see, the reference number that we wrote down was not actually a reference number that we needed. In here, it will show you, because we're looking for stock receipts, the type REC refers to a stock receipt. Each different stock movement has a different code in there. So if you're running a report based on something else which has lots of other different types, it will list the different types in there. So as you can see on this date, these stock receipts were processed, and we know that the top two are not ours because it's a different product, but the bottom three are. And this will give you the differences between the old and the new quantities. For instance, 400, 410 is obviously receiving 10 of the product. Again, 410, 420 is receiving 10 of the product. And 400 to 460 is obviously receiving 60 of them. So as you can see, they've all got different reference numbers, so they're all individual transactions, then the reference number refers to something that's individual. So they're all individual processes in there. And it also gives you the old cost and the new cost if a cost changes at all, which in this case it didn't, and the adjusted value and the variance, etc. And it gives you the report total. So it is a very detailed way of looking for things. If you're trying to look for very detailed information, that's always a good thing to do. That's pretty much all there is to it, and that concludes today's webinar.